Xenoblade X is one of the greatest video games ever made. I know that's quite the statement to make, but I wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't true. This game is so masterful in so many ways. It has some of the best side quests and combat I've ever seen in a game, and even the characters are likable. Furthermore, there's one particular aspect of this game that stands above all of its peers. Granted, it's not perfect, it's a bit rough around the edges, and it has its flaws. But where this game excels, it's orders of magnitude above nearly all of its competition. So in July of this year, NBA superstar and future Hall of Famer Giannis Antetokounmpo cemented himself as one of the greatest basketball players of all time by winning the most prestigious award in basketball. For a long time, I didn't like Giannis. I thought all he did was dunk, play admittedly all-star level defense, and fly through the air like prime MJ. But to me, that was boring. You can only watch someone dunk so many times before it gets old. Personally, I prefer players who can put their defender in a blender like Kyrie. I like players who can pull up from half court like Steph. But after seeing what he's done over these past few seasons, and especially after his performance in the finals, I have tremendous respect and appreciation for Giannis and what he can do on the court. He's not the greatest shooter. He doesn't have wizard-like handles, but he plays to his strengths and comes out one of the greatest basketball players of all time. Now, why did I just spend all that time talking about Giannis? Because I think Xenoblade X is in a very similar position. It's not for everyone. It doesn't do everything perfectly. It doesn't have a narrative that makes you question if you really exist, its mechanics can be difficult to learn, and the characters are pretty one-dimensional. However, focusing on what's bad about this game is the equivalent of focusing on Giannis' shooting ability. If you so desperately fixate on the negatives, you might miss out on one of the greatest of all time. So without further ado, let's talk about Xenoblade Chronicles X, Monolith's masterpiece. To understand a lot of what I'm about to say, you need to understand the setting of this game, some of the characters, and a very basic rundown of the story. The story begins in the year 2054. The Earth is destroyed by two conflicting alien forces. The survivors are on an ark. The ship broke into pieces upon crash to take the surviving humans. A few months later, life ship shut down. So now the goal is to destroy humans and life on the ships. Basically, their characters. The main group is called Team Easy Characters. Just the main almost called the humanity and a sensitive vegetable. Alright, you get all that? All caught up? No. Fine, I'll give you a TLDR. Earth is gone, humanity's remnants are on Mira, and you're on the most elite military team, Team Elma. Your job is to explore Mira, find the Lifehold, which contains all the civilians who are on the White Whale, and save the remnants of humanity. Now, everything about this game follows the theme of survival. The side quests in particular are all about surviving on a new planet. But it isn't just how are we going to live, it's how are we going to live. You see what anyway. What I mean is you have to focus on surviving first, of course, but also on things like living with alien races, partitioning resources, or infighting, and the list goes on. That's why the side quests are so critically important in this game. They all help reinforce the central themes of the game, and they help develop the world and its characters even more. Hey, whoa, slow your roll there, buddy. There's some spoilers ahead. Go ahead and skip to this timestamp on the screen if you don't like that. Now granted, it's just side quest spoilers, but just to be safe, you know? Anyway. Nearly every side quest from every video game falls into one of two categories. Either go get something, or go kill something. What separates the goods from the greats is often context and scale. There's a big difference in meaning when you collect flowers for someone's soup and when you collect them to make an antidote for their sick friend. And there's literally a huge difference between fighting a bear and fighting something that can do this. Both quests are fundamentally the same, however they differ in their context and their scale. The side quests in Xenoblade X focus primarily on the context side of things. You're never thrown into a meaningless fight with small animals, there's always something more to it. For example, at the start of the game, this guy asks you to either kill or spare these little piglets. They're close to the city, so they could pose a threat if they're not taken care of before they grow. On my first playthrough, of course, I spared them because I figured they're small, they won't hurt anyone. I walked away with a smile on my face, convinced I did the right thing. Unfortunately, however, later in the game you find that same guy dying on the ground near the cave. Turns out those pigs you spared grew up and killed him. Something that seemed as simple as just go kill a few enemies turns into a moral question on whether or not you should kill them before they turn into a potential threat to the people of the city. So what do? Your choice here actually matters as it changes things later in the game. This isn't a revolutionary idea. However, what it does do is remind you that this planet is not a totally safe playground to explore and have fun in. Everything needs to be considered when making decisions here, even if it hurts. You have to do what's best for the people. But not all the side quests are two-parters like this one. You see, some side quests transcend the genre they're in, and this next one is the perfect example of that. So in this quest, you go to the water plant to check some things out. Apparently, the crew here has been slacking off for a few days, so you're told to go check it out and give them a stern talking to. Turns out something happened to the plant. There are these eggs everywhere, and there are these really creepy looking monsters. There's a woman inside named Ajoa. No one else is at the plant, but she's convinced that the others are just lost somewhere. After taking down a few more monsters, you get an access key that allows you to see the security footage, and finally find out what happened here. But before then, Ajoa complains about feeling dry and asks to go take a shower. Strange time for a shower, and with all the monsters around, it's a very bad idea. However, after hearing the security audio, you realize just how terrible of an idea it was. On Earth, we have these guys. They're called parasitoid wasps. These horrific creatures lay their eggs inside of small bugs like caterpillars. The parasite then grows inside of the host, consuming their tissue until they're large enough to pop out and start the cycle all over again. The worst part is, sometimes the host is alive until the very end. These monsters that attack the plant are just like the parasitoid wasp. They lay their eggs in people, and yeah. That's why you find other scientists' keycards on the monsters. They didn't eat them, well, not in the traditional sense. This is also why Ajoa wanted to shower at such a random time. These eggs only hatch when they get enough water. Had she gone to take a shower, this quest would have taken a much darker turn. Okay, enough nightmare fuel. Let's talk about a much more lighthearted quest. One of my favorite characters in this game is Mia. She doesn't know how to fight, she's failed the test to get into Blade multiple times, and honestly she might be the least prepared person to explore Mira. So she decides it's time to explore Mira. Because she's not a Blade, she's not allowed to purchase combat gear, so she asks you to do it for her. Upon receiving the gear, she sneaks out. This is not only against the rules, it's extremely stupid and dangerous. Here's why this is such an awful decision. She doesn't know how to fight, she has no experience exploring the world at all, she's doing all of this by herself, and worst of all, since she's not an official member of Blade, no one knows where she is. If she gets into a tight spot and needs help, no one will even know to come save her. Anyway, miraculously, Mia survives and you find her in different spots on every continent in Mira. And she eventually returns back to the city after a lot of trials and tribulations. However, it's through these struggles that she learns enough to be a huge help to the organization she so desperately wanted to join in the beginning of her journey. Joining Blade goes from something she wanted to do for fun to something she should do as a responsibility. It's an ironic twist and a great end to a very, very long quest line. Now there are a few more side quests I'd like to talk about, but for the sake of time, we'll move on. Okay, so admittedly the characters in this game aren't anything special, but I do still think they're worth talking about a bit. Let's talk about Mia first, since we already mentioned her earlier. She goes from being a desperate Blade dropout to someone who Blade genuinely needs. By learning more about the world, she's able to help the organization in ways that no one else could. HB is another fun character. He's comically arrogant and a bit of a jerk, but once you finally earn his respect, he's not so bad. Irina, like the other two before her, isn't all that complex, but she's a likable hothead who's always laser focused on doing the right thing. Lynn is a brilliant kid who lost her parents when the White Whale left Earth. She uses this as motivation to work as hard as possible and ensure she finishes the work that her parents started. Okay, let's talk about these characters. I think a lot of this is subjective, but here are my thoughts. I don't think every character needs to be written brilliantly. We can't all be Kiryu. So, if characters are supposed to be the pioneers that bravely move the plot forwards, then what are they supposed to do in a game without a focus on plot? I think the answer to that is simple. I think they're just entertainers. They're simple people that add very little to the big picture, but if they make you laugh, if they make you smile, if they make you happy even for a brief moment, then I think they did their job. What the characters in this game lack in depth and complexity, they make up for in likability. However, I'd just like to reiterate, this does not mean it's okay to have mediocre characters like this. I just think it's okay in a situation where the focus of the game isn't on the plot. There's a reason no one complains about character development in games like Monster Hunter or Mario. Speaking of focus, let's talk about this game's focus, the gameplay. We'll start with the combat. Okay, I'll be honest with you, combat in this game is pretty phenomenal. It's very nearly the best part of this game. Although, as I mentioned in the intro, there's one part that's in a totally different league. This combat is pretty complicated, and the game's tutorials don't do the best job of teaching you. But once you figure it out, it's one of the most rewarding systems in any game. So I guess I should explain how combat works. If you already know, just bear with me. This is very important, and if I don't explain it at least at a surface level, none of this next section will make any sense. Okay, so these 8 circles on the bottom are your arts. You use them to do all sorts of things from damage to buffs to debuffs, the list goes on. Basically, you can think of them like special moves. They build up automatically over time. You also auto-attack to fill up this thing, your TP gauge, which you can use to do moves that are even more special. That's basically all you need to know for now. I'll explain more things as they come up. The game starts you off with the Drifter class. It gives you access to a knife for buffs and a gun for damage. This is actually a really great choice for a starting class, and here's why. This class's arts are all meant to teach you something about the combat of the game. Slit Edge, for example, teaches you that some arts do more damage from certain positions. Then there's Assault Hammer, which teaches you about toppling monsters, and Flame Grenade, which does more damage to toppled enemies. This is a very quick and easy combo that you learn super early on. And it's not just the starting class that specializes in something. Each class specializes in a specific aspect of combat. Let's look at one of my favorite classes, the Full Metal Jaguar. This class focuses primarily on positioning. One of the first arts you get is called Backslash. If you can believe it, this art is meant to be used when you're behind the enemy. You also get Sliding Slinger and Shadowrunner. Sliding Slinger gives you more TP if you attack from the side, and Shadowrunner helps with Backslash by boosting your damage down to the back of the enemies. Basically, this whole class focuses on where you are relative to the enemy you're fighting. Now, you could ignore positioning, but if you do, you're missing out on a tremendous amount of damage. This is another example of expert game design because once you max out this class, you've once again learned more about the combat of the game. Now you know exactly how to use positional arts. But there's another bonus. You see, each class comes with 2 weapons that you can only use with that class. However, upon mastering that class, you can use those weapons regardless of your class. And that includes the arts that come with them. This allows you to make your own custom sets based on which weapons and arts you like the most. So what can you do with this? Well, look at the Galactic Knight, for example. This class comes with a lightsaber, but a support heavy ranged weapon, meaning you'll do a ton of damage with melee, but you won't be able to do much with range. So why not max out Astral Crusader first, and then switch to Galactic Knight so you can have a lightsaber and a sniper rifle. Now you've got all the benefits of both classes. There may be a Full Metal in this game, but there's certainly no equivalent exchange.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
Anyway, garbage humor out of the way. Let's talk about 2 other aspects of the combat. First, Skell combat. While satisfying, it's pretty one-dimensional. I mean, let's not get it twisted. The feeling of fighting a giant monster in a mech is something very few games can offer. But the combat does suffer a little bit in strange ways. There's a mechanic with your arts called secondary cooldown. It basically allows you to charge your arts for better effects. Sometimes it's instant reuse, sometimes it's higher damage, but for some reason this mechanic is just missing from Skell combat. It's kinda weird. That said, I'm hard pressed to be upset when you can do stuff like this. Skells also have this strange mechanic that's based on your potential stat. It instantly resets your art cooldown, which is great, but it's random. Like I said, strange choices. Anyway, there's one last part of the combat, and it's pretty incredible.
Close in and clean up!
When I first played this game on release, I ignored this mechanic for the entire game. I didn't understand it, and my brain was too small to learn. However, that was a terrible mistake since it elevates this game's combat to a point where I'm comfortable saying it's one of the best combat systems I've ever played. So what is Overdrive? You can think of it kinda like Super Saiyan, basically a temporary special state that gives you a bunch of new abilities. It totally changes the combat. You now have something called tertiary cooldown, which is a stronger version of secondary cooldown. Arts also recharge super fast while in this state. There's also this timer on the bottom that shows you how long you can stay in overdrive. You can extend it by using certain arts. The number in the middle is the multiplier for your damage. The main thing you need to know about overdrive is it speeds up combat dramatically, allows for absurd damage, and really lets your build shine. If you wanted to, you could just focus entirely on arts and skills that are meant for overdrive. This may end up hurting you in your base form, but when you go into overdrive, maybe you can shred through everything so fast that it doesn't matter. It's just such a fun mechanic to play around with, and at its peak, you can even beat the super bosses of the game on foot. Alone. So why didn't I use it in my first playthrough? Well, this mechanic is very complicated, if you couldn't tell already. And the game doesn't really help you understand it. This is the tutorial you get for Overdrive. That's it. Thanks, Elma. Very helpful. I had to look up a 20-minute video to figure out how to use this mechanic. Now when I learned how to use it, it was great, but I shouldn't have to take a 3000 level course to figure out how it works. Anyway, that's all for the combat. Now finally, onto the best part of this game, the open world. When I say Zelda Breath of the Wild, what do you think of? A Game of the Year winner? One of the most innovative games ever made? The best Zelda game? Well, regardless of what you think of, we can probably all agree on one thing. It has one of the most innovative open worlds of any video game, and it redefined what it means to be an open world game. It changed the Zelda series and the gaming landscape in such a way that we now live in a post-Breath of the Wild era of gaming. Zelda games will never be the same thanks to Breath of the Wild. Open world games will never be the same thanks to Breath of the Wild. Video games will never be the same thanks to Breath of the Wild. But what if I told you Breath of the Wild wouldn't even exist as we know it if it wasn't for Xenoblade X? While Breath of the Wild was still in development, the team ran into a bit of trouble. You see, Zelda games have never been this open before, and the team at Nintendo needed some help. So who did they call in? Monolith, the creators of Xenoblade X. Xenoblade X is the reason Breath of the Wild is as great as it is. Without Xenoblade X, we don't get deadly enemies in starting areas like the Guardians. We don't get the verticality the game is famous for. Without Xenoblade X, we don't get the main draw of Breath of the Wild, the ability to go anywhere and do anything. Xenoblade X is the Larry Jordan to Breath of the Wild's Michael. Without the one who worked hard behind the scenes, we don't get the legendary icon that everyone loves and reveres. Alright, history lesson out of the way. Let's finally look at the open world of Xenoblade X. Now there are lots of ways to look at an open world. Like, what do you get for exploring, for example? Having things to find gives you a reason to explore. That way when you ask what's at the top of this mountain, you actually get an answer. However, I also think it's important that there are things to find that you can make a story out of. Stuff like running deep into a cave in search for a treasure only to be ambushed by dozens of enemies and forced to run for your life. I think a problem a lot of open world games run into is that they don't actually have a reason to be open world. It's just an excuse to boast about this huge open world, but there's not actually anything in it. If an open world isn't going to have anything in it, why is it open? I would much rather have a linear game filled with content than an open world game that's nearly empty. In Xenoblade X, it's sometimes difficult to go from one place to another without running into some sort of distraction. Whether it's a cool looking enemy you want to fight, or a cave you want to explore, some massive landmark that you just have to investigate, there's always something nearby to interact with. I genuinely struggle to find an open world as filled with content as this one. Okay, so I've talked so much about all this content. What actually is it? What is there to find in Xenoblade X's open world? Well, there are three main things you can find in the world. Boss enemies known as tyrants, treasures and data probes that give you EXP and expand your map, and finally, landmarks. Tyrants are great because, as I established before, the combat in this game is super fun. So they're the perfect place to test your build. And they're not just there for combat purposes. Tyrants also give you some incredible equipment. When you beat one, it'll give you equipment relative to its strength, so it's usually the best gear for what you can get at the time. Tyrants are all over the place, but you can't just beat all of them. Look at my man's here. You cannot fight this behemoth before at least 70 hours into the game. It's not possible. You can't damage him, and he... well, yeah. But this monkey isn't the only massive marauding monstrosity. These creatures are all over the world, and they're a grim reminder that humanity lives in fear of the tyrants. The only option for these things is to just run away. You can't fight them. This plays into the theme of survival even more. Oftentimes in games you're told the world is dangerous. In Xenoblade X, it actually is. Treasures and data probes are super useful. As I mentioned before, they allow you to gain some extra EXP and expand your map. When you get a data probe, it even shows you what kind of things are nearby, like treasures. It's small things like this that I think often go unnoticed in the great open world games. The little things that just help tie the world together. Stuff like monster parts in Breath of the Wild. They net you a fair bit of rupees if you sell them, and you can give them to this creepy dude who sells you cool items. So like I said, sometimes it's the little things. But you know it's not so little? the landmarks in this world. The landmarks in this game are nothing short of awe-inspiring. They're like most landmarks in open world games in that they give you EXP for finding them and sometimes side quests and treasures. But they give you another thing that's a bit harder to measure. I mean, just look at some of these views. They're absolutely magical. I think the biggest reason Xenoblade X succeeds as an open world game is the same reason Breath of the Wild succeeds. It makes the act of simply exploring the world a joy. Not doing the side quests, not fighting, not getting shiny new trinkets, just the act of what's over there and just going. Just running around in this game and seeing what's around you presents a majesty and beauty like no other game can. In life we judge based on greatness, and as humans we fail a lot. Most of the things you do in life will fail. You'll send out 100 job applications that'll all get rejected. You'll mess up hundreds of recipes, make thousands of wrong turns, millions of typos, and the list goes on. But it's not just us ordinary people that fail. No, the greats fail as well. Tony Hawk has fallen thousands of times. Stephen Curry, the greatest shooter of all time, has missed tens of thousands of shots. But, again, we judge based on greatness. The shots that Steph missed don't matter. These do. The times Tony Hawk fell don't matter. This does. The times we fail don't matter. It's the times that we succeed that define our lives. And as far as video games go, this game has a whole lot of missed shots. It falls a lot. But that's not what matters. What matters is that what this game does right, it does better than any other video game. In the same way that you can't describe the majesty of Yosemite Park or the unmistakable feeling of falling in love, I cannot describe how special this game is with words. I've tried over the duration of this video, but it's not possible. I mean, how do I describe this? Or this? How do I describe this? The reality of it is, I can't. Some things can't be described or shown to you. There are some things that you just need to experience. This game is one of those things. That is what makes Xenoblade Chronicles X so special. And that is why it's one of the greatest video games ever made.